I'm Jeff Korman, the manager of the Maryland department here at the Enoch Pratt Free Library, Maryland State Library. Today, I'm going to talk about the mysterious death of Edgar Allan Poe. For about 160 years now, people have been speculating about what really killed Poe. We know that he died here in Baltimore in October of 1849, but no one is really sure of the causes of his death. And there have been many theories over the years about what really happened that weekend. We know that Poe arrived in Baltimore on September 28th. He checked into a hotel and went out on the town because he had acquaintances here in Baltimore, having lived here for a number of years. Then there's a period of days where he just disappears. And the next thing we know, he's found lying in the gutter here in a Baltimore street outside of a tavern, which was being used as a polling place that day. October 4th was an election day here in Baltimore. He was semi-conscious. And after being identified by some people, he was taken to a local hospital, the Baltimore City and Marine Hospital. When he arrived there, Poe was put under the care of a Dr. John Moran. After being there for a number of days and being tended to by Moran's wife, on the morning of October 7th, the Sunday morning, 1849, Poe awoke, he opened his eyes, looked up at the ceiling, said, "Lord, have mercy on my soul," and he died. He was 40 years old. I'm now in the Pratt Library's Edgar Allan Poe room, which is on the second floor of the main library. And here, of course, you can see that we have an homage to Mr. Poe. This portrait behind me, and on either side of me, some of the Poeana that we keep here at the library. And I thought that this would be a good place to talk about some of the potential reasons that have been discussed about Poe's death. The first one is hydrophobia. Hydrophobia became a very popular explanation in the late 20th century. However, we do know from some of the notes that Dr. Moran left that it could not have been possible that Poe had hydrophobia or rabies. We also know that this was probably developed as part of a hoax from a medical school. So we can eliminate hydrophobia as one of the potential problems. The second, alcohol poisoning. You know, it's discussed at great length the fact that Poe could have been an alcoholic, or he had some sort of malady that was when he took just a little bit of drink, it put him under for days. Some of these possible explanations are known as porphyria or mania potu. One reason we think that alcohol might not have been involved is that we know, of course, at this time that he had just become engaged to Elmira Shelton down in Richmond. And he had promised her that he would not drink. She was part of the growing temperance movement and would not marry him if he was involved with alcohol in any way. And he seemed very serious this time about getting his life back together. There are many other theories that can be discussed. I personally have seen up to 20 of them. Mugging is another theory that's brought up from time to time because we know that he was here in Baltimore. He had taken subscriptions for a literary magazine he wanted to start. So that's not out of the realm of possibility. But one of the theories that really is brought to light over and over and over again by people who study Poe is something called Cooping. Now, politics was a pretty violent game in the 1840s and for the decades and a few decades after that. And it worked this way. Gangs of what I'll refer to as thugs, but these were actually followers of a certain political party. A few days before an election, they would go around town and befriend people who were homeless, people who were transient, or just plain old drunks. They would befriend them, they would buy them drinks, and when they got them pretty good and drunk, they would take them to an abandoned building or an old abandoned house and keep them there until the day of the election. Sort of coop them, much like chickens would be kept in a coop. Then, on election day, they would take these people out on the street from one polling place to another, have them vote for their party, buy them a drink, and then take them to another polling place. They didn't have the checks and balances we have today when we have an election. Now, of course, we know that on October 4th, when Poe was found, number one, it was an election day here in Baltimore. Number two, he was found either outside or just inside Ryan's 4th Ward Pole, which on most days was known as Gunner's Hall. It was a saloon. So it's conceivable that he could have been cooped. Let's look at some of those facts. He got to Baltimore on the 28th of September. We know he was seen up to a day later, but then he disappears for 4 or 5 days. Very viable that he might have been cooped. On election day, he may have been taken out, voted, given drink, voted again, and then on and on until he got to maybe a dozen, 15 or so polling places where he might have just collapsed in the street and was left there. While cooping is a theory that many people point to as being very possible, there was another theory put forth about 10 or 15 years ago in a book entitled Midnight Dreary that was written by John Evangelist Walsh. Now, this book combines many of the earlier theories we spoke about, but it brings to light one other piece that could potentially have happened. It went like this. Most of the testimony that Walsh uses in this book were brought to the fore by a woman named Elizabeth Oakes Smith, who was a friend of Poe's, and this was about 20 years after his death. Here's what they say. That Poe arrived in Baltimore, just as everyone thinks. He stayed here for a day or two, and then he was on his way to Philadelphia and New York to do some work, and then to pick up his aunt, Maria Clem, and bring her back to Richmond to live with him and Elmira Shelton. Actually, the letters that Elmira wrote to Maria introducing herself show us that it looked like it was going to be a very warm relationship. So Poe gets on the train going north from Baltimore. Somewhere outside the city, he notices that he's being followed. Who is he being followed by but the brothers of Elmira Shelton? When he sees this, he decides that he's going to give them the slip, as it were, and he gets off the train before Philadelphia, gets back on a train going southbound again toward Baltimore. The brothers see this and they follow him. When he gets back to Baltimore, he checks into not the hotel he's checked into presently, but another hotel. The brothers follow him there. When they find the room that he's in, they pound on the door and demand that Poe give up any claim at all to his sister. What we haven't spoken about is that Elmira Shelton at that time stood to inherit $100,000 from her recently deceased first husband. They probably thought Poe was a gold digger. They pounded on the door. They explained that they needed him to renounce their sister and any claim to marriage or that inheritance that he might have benefited from. Poe answered, "Never. This is not going to happen." So they pounded on the door again, and this went on 2 or 3 more times until finally they broke down the door, raided the room, and beat Poe severely. It's also conceivable at this time that once they had beaten him, they forced him to drink. This wouldn't have looked good for Poe at all. And then they took him out on the street and left him lying in front of this polling place. It was not unusual in 1849 to see someone pretty drunk lying in the street in front of a polling place. He was just another person who might have been cooped. Here at the Pratt Library, we're fortunate enough to have a few mementos of Poe's death. We keep them here in our vault. Among the memorabilia that we have from Poe's death are 2 pieces that are kept in this box. A piece of Poe's coffin. People who study Poe and know about his death and the years following know that he was originally buried in the back of the Westminster graveyard. And it wasn't until 1873 that he was reinterred under the monument that exists there today. In moving his coffin, a piece chipped off, and here in this box is an original piece of Edgar Allan Poe's coffin. In addition to that, here at Pratt, we hold locks of hair that were cut from the head of the individuals shortly after they died. It was common practice at that time, and still common practice, I understand, in many families. What we have in this frame, both Edgar and a lock of his wife Virginia's hair. Virginia's, of course, is the more voluminous, it's the curly hair. This is Edgar's hair, right up here, the straight hair. Well, we've been to the library's vault, and we've been to the library's Poe room. Now I'm standing in the Special Collections Department reading room here at the library, where I have with me a few really important pieces of Poe's life. In my hand right now is the letter that Elmira Shelton wrote to Maria Clem in September of 1849. This is the actual letter where she's introducing herself again to Maria because she had known her or had been acquainted with her much earlier in her life, and talks to her about her coming to live with them and how welcome she is and how wonderful life will be from them. It's a rather lengthy letter. Here's the other side. And when Maria received this letter, of course, she was thrilled and anxious for Edgar to come and get her from the Bronx, where she was living, and bring her down to Richmond. This other letter that we have here in our Special Collections Department is among many of the letters from Poe and from Poe's family that were written during his lifetime. This is the letter that Dr. Moran, the attending physician at the Baltimore City and Marine Hospital, wrote to Maria Clem, about a month after his death. It's actually dated November 15th, 1849. Mrs. Clem apparently had contacted Dr. Moran to ask him about Poe's last days, and he did take quite a bit of time to write to her and explain, again, another lengthy letter that discussed his last hours. And this letter was used by Moran to later actually go out on the lecture circuit and talk about Poe's last days as his being his attending physician. There are many possible explanations as to how Poe died. But there is one thing that we do know. We don't know. And after all of these years, isn't it fitting that the man who gave us so much mystery died in a mysterious way here in Baltimore?